Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who've just joined, my name is Kutsia Naki, and I'm a program manager at Equal Justice Works, and I'm joined by my colleague Brian Stone, also a program manager at Equal Justice Works, who's graciously agreed to assist with the technology for this webinar. Just to make sure you're in the right place, this is the webinar on project management, and I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Katrina Velasquez, who is the Vice President for Government Relations at Guide Consulting. And so I'm going to now turn it over to Katrina and ask her to just say a few words of introduction and a little bit about what she does.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can change to the next slide there. So everyone, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Katrina Velasquez. Just a little bit of background about myself. So I once was a young attorney handling a million cases on top of a personal life, on top of social relationships. So I'm hoping to aim this project management webinar towards you because I know exactly what it's like to be in your shoes. A little history. So after graduating in law school from Catholic University Law School here in DC, I went abroad. I went to Guatemala and I actually practiced immigration law at International Organization for Migration for about a year and a half. A lot of things came along with that. I think if any of you ever practice any immigration or even your current work here, it does take a hit. So I took a step back. And I actually moved to your colleagues here at Equal Justice Works, where I help to manage the programs, just like Kutsia does, for about a year and a half. And then I moved over to the government relations side. So now I work more with Congress on federal policy and legislation. But we, of course, will not be talking about that. I do know all the rules related to federal government grants, so we will not talk about anything related to policy, advocacy, or anything along those lines. And we're really just going to stick with more about discussing how you can work better in your environment. Not only how you can work as a better employee, so managing your own cases, how you can work with your coworkers, how you can work with your boss, and then if you have any volunteers or interns that work underneath you, how you can help to manage them better. So really all these different discussions we're going to have today are really going to hit on little tips and things you can do to help you better manage yourself and become a more effective attorney. So I have a couple of questions here, but we'll skip on to slide number 4 if possible, since everyone is muted. There we go. Okay, so first I just want to tell everyone a little bit of story and, try to think about if this may potentially be you. So there once was an attorney who accepted more and more responsibility at her nonprofit. She was juggling 8 different client cases, overseeing interns and volunteers, and was working hard to keep on top of her work. She normally would get in around 8 a.m., sometimes earlier, and began checking her emails, which oftentimes, as soon as she got in, was about 150 emails from her clients, her coworkers, her boss, asking a number of questions. So on this particular day, she looks in and she sees a couple of questions from her coworkers who are working on the same case with her. So she starts working on that. Soon her boss comes in and requests some legal research on a specific topic. So she gets diverted to that. And then her volunteer calls and requests that she puts out a fire. So she turns her attention over to that. And then finally her coworker swings by her office and says, hey, what about that original question that I sent you at 7:30 a.m.? And her focus switches to that. By the time she looks at her clock, she realizes, oh my gosh, it is almost lunchtime. Where did the time go? So I think the situation is just so common for attorneys, and really it's so common for anyone in the client serving industry, any of these service industries that have a number of clients. This is just very common. The more senior you get, like you guys all are now fully practicing law, the more your work will actually increase. And naturally, because you are a high achiever, as all of us attorneys are, you want to do everything perfectly. So your workloads, your emails, your reports, your questions, your meetings, it gets to be too much to keep on top of, especially when you're trying to do everything perfectly. So let's talk a little bit first about how you can manage yourself and your time. And once you're able to manage yourself and your time, it's really actually going to have a very positive impact on your final results. So what I want to say is for all of you perfectionists out there, you know, some of these tips might irk you a little bit, but what I'll say is that your results are going to be really high, much higher than before. So keep that final end goal in mind here. So the first thing, overall, you know, really think about getting organized and clarifying what you need to accomplish. So the first thing you need to do is you need to focus on your big milestones. So you need to come in every single day and say, what are the 1 or 2 goals that I need to finish today? And if possible, do them first before the fires start coming, the coworkers start coming in, etc. I think a lot of the times it's so easy for us to get pulled into what's immediately at hand or what's easy and comfortable to work on throughout the day. So just giving you an example of my day, I've been in here since 7:30 a.m. I started checking emails. I was checking emails for about a half an hour. My employee came in. She wanted to discuss how to present the specific case. So then I diverted a half an hour with her. But then I had one big thing, and I actually write it on a piece of paper. I had one big thing that I wanted to do today. So I think it's really important just to first make sure every single day you have 1 or 2 goals that you need to accomplish that day, and you make it a priority to accomplish them. And again, it may seem obvious, but I think, as you probably know, it is easy to forget, especially as different things happen throughout the day. Another thing to think about is really the comparative advantage of time management. So I know some of you may not have, for example, anyone who work underneath you, like an intern or a volunteer or employee. Maybe you have coworkers who help you out. Maybe there's a paralegal or an assistant that helps everyone out in your organization. But really thinking about really whose time is best spent doing something. So you should really think about spending your time on areas where you are better than your team. So, for example, say you have a new intern who maybe is working with you, and they could do things, for example, like legal research easily. But you, as a practicing attorney, are probably the best person to do things like develop your actual legal analysis, to be using that research and developing the analysis instead of spending all the time doing the research. So you probably are an expert. Maybe you did journal in law school. Maybe you just love doing research. And even though you probably could do it faster than delegating it out, the thing is that your time is actually better spent on kind of those higher level things that no one else can do underneath you. So it's kind of this comparative advantage. So whenever you can, delegate as much as you can, and then focus yourself on those higher level things that no one else can do. And what I would say is that when it comes to delegating, and again, I know this is if you have someone underneath you or maybe a coworker you can delegate to, it is going to require training. And so you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have time to train. I'm just so busy. What I would say is once you train someone right, it'll probably take a couple of weeks. Once you train them right, they'll know how to do it right from there on. So in the end, you're actually saving time. And then finally, I know this is going to irk some of you, but think about getting the project done well enough instead of perfectly. And that really goes a lot into really delegating to someone who maybe not be as great as you are at doing, for example, legal research. But if they could get it done well enough for you to be able to do that higher level stuff, that should be your goal. Because again, you have more and more stuff coming at you, and you know, unfortunately, you're only human, so you can't be expecting to do everything 110% without blowing a fuse somewhere or you know, just dying of sleep deprivation. So just really thinking about the comparative advantage of time management. The next thing is really managing your calendar. So our calendars can really manage ourselves. And I would show you my calendar now, and you may be shocked, may actually ask me when I actually do real work. But what I would say is that I think we easily let ourselves schedule meetings, you know, do all these other additional activities that come about, but it's really important to take charge of your calendar. So one of the things when you're taking charge of your calendar is first off, when someone sends you a meeting request, evaluate, obviously if it's your boss, you probably won't be evaluating it, but evaluate if you actually need to attend. So say a coworker sends you an hour-and-a-half presentation about something. Ask yourself, is my time best spent in this, or should I actually be working on like this bigger workload that I need to be working on? Just really managing your calendar. And then another thing, and I actually do this very regularly, is actually create work blocks on your calendar. So make calendar invitations for yourself. So, you know, obviously you'll accept and make sure you're sticking with them. So give yourself an hour time block, an hour-and-a-half time block to do whatever specific thing that you need to do. And going back to those big milestones that we talked about at the beginning, really thinking about having those time blocks be earlier in the day before those distractions start hitting you. And keep to those milestones. So I usually tell anyone working with me, and you know, my superior and I have a very strong relationship, so he knows just as well that, you know, when I'm in my time block, I don't want to be interrupted, just so I can make sure I can get things done. So really creating those work block timelines for yourself. And then another thing is knowing when you should get more involved. So this can go to a variety of things. This can go with your coworkers. This can go with if you have any interns or volunteers you're working with, or it can even go with your clients. Really being conscious of your time and knowing when you should be stepping in. You know, you can do, for example, if you have an intern and you delegated them something, I would say kind of be like a helicopter and do kind of regular check-ins and make sure there's no smoke, and then come out of it, and then regular check-ins a couple, you know, a week or two later, just to make sure everything's on track. But just don't be hovering over watching it at all times, because you're going to be wasting your time doing that. All right, I'm going to pause on there to see if there's any questions. To see if you want to let me know if there's any questions. I'll pause for a couple of minutes.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to unmute the line to see if there's any questions.
Okay, great. All right, guess no questions. All right, we can go to the next one. All right, so the next element of not only managing your time is also developing a really good organization system. So, you know, I'm sure you definitely have some type of organization systems. Maybe you have sticky notes everywhere on your computer. There's like a bunch of different sticky notes, either the ones that are available on your desktop or the ones that you actually physically stick on it. Maybe you have a number of to-do lists. But what I would say is that you need to develop a really, really strong organization system. And every piece of information needs to have one home. And what I would say is, and I get caught up in this all the time, that one home should not be your head. It should actually be somewhere where you are putting everything that you need to do, whether it's pieces of paper, an action item, things you need to read. Everything needs one home. Because otherwise, once things start getting crazy and hectic, you're just likely going to be forgetting something. Or if you have multiple lists, you're likely going to stop looking at one list and focusing on another. So everything you should do, it should really have one home. It should funnel into as few places as possible. As I just said, too many, and you'll probably stop looking at them. And I definitely am a big I am a big person guilty of this, is that I have a lot of to-do lists, and it's a hard time for me until I actually go into one. So funnel everything into places, and what I would say is that really you need 3 places. So first is you need a folder to really store your key materials that you need. So things you maybe need to keep, things that you have action on, or things you need to read. These, of course, could be paper, or they can be folders like on your computer. So your calendar also needs to capture every item with dates, and it also needs to feed into your list. And then you should have one list, which I know can be hard. You need to have one list with all your action items and ID what your time should be spending on. So, there's a great tool, and what I would say is creating both a weekly plus and a daily list, and that will actually help feed into it. So both of these should feed into each other, but a weekly plus should really lay out the big accomplishments you need to do for each client for that week. So you want to include the deadlines, maybe highlight the things that you need to do, for example, that week for sure, and maybe have the things not bolded that can wait till the following week. And you'll want to follow up with that regularly. Also for your weekly plus, while I know we don't like to think about it, including things that are not only our client work. So for example, if you have professional development requirements, if there are personal things, for example, we all have those things like make sure you're paying the gas bill, or doing a happy hour with your coworkers, or things along those lines. That should all be on your list, because even though we're at work, we don't fully separate from our personal to social sometimes, especially when we're as busy as we are. And then also create a daily list that's based off of your weekly list. So every single day, as I mentioned earlier, you should have 1 or 2 big milestones that you want to complete. And for those milestones, really aim for them to get done. And that's why you do those work blocks that we discussed before. So really aim for those milestones to get done each day, and then you're going to feel so much more successful each and every day to say, okay, I did those 2 big things. Today was very accomplished. Instead of going through your entire day and realize, oh my gosh, I did a million things, but the actual things I needed to get done, I didn't do. So again, just working on having 2 lists, one that's daily and one that's a weekly plus. Having your calendar that captures every items with the dates and that feeds into your list. And then keeping a folder that has all the materials you actually need, things you need to keep, things you need action on, and things you need to read. Also, make sure that your management is really, your organization system is easy to maintain and makes your life easier. So one of the things that we use often, as we have a lot of events that pull in the community with our work, is that we actually create project management tools. So really that keep not only myself but my team on track. And when I say my team, I'm talking about people who work underneath me, people who are horizontal with me, and then people who are above me. So one thing you could possibly consider using is called a Gantt graph, G-A-N-T-T graph. And this is really a great time management tool. You can find plenty of them free online that connect with your Excel sheet, or there are also other ones. For example, Smartsheets is a free one online that you can use. And it actually lets you set up the project and then the tasks that go along with it. You assign who the owner is of that, and then you actually create a deadline for it. So it helps you to start from the beginning. So obviously you're going to start from when the deadline is, and then you're going to go backwards. And so you could just do that for each of your projects. Whether, for example, you have a deadline to submit an application for a client or something like that, you know how long it takes you to do things, your people who work with you to do things, your coworkers. So you can really work to creating really this timeline and get everyone on the same page. So usually when I set up a project with a Gantt graph, we'll sit down with a team and we'll go through everyone's kind of different roles of it. It helps people to see them laid out. And then once they see their roles, then you'll do check-ins, do regular check-ins just to see where everyone's at. That's going back to taking kind of that piece instead of being on people at all times. And then you just keep following up and making sure things are getting done. Also, you want to make sure that your organization system is portable and accessible. So you don't want it to be, for example, maybe a big notebook that you accidentally leave at the office. If you can make it something that's easy for you to carry and take at all times, or maybe something that's digital, that's usually the best because you're going to want it at all times. And then finally, as I mentioned before, you want to really make sure that your work block for organizing your systems and emails. So what I mean by this is that organization systems just don't pop up. Usually what I do is every single Friday afternoon before I go home for the weekend, I will take about an hour and a half and I will actually plan my entire next week utilizing the organization system. So what I'd say is really taking that time the week before, the Friday before, or even the Monday if you want to wait till Monday, and just really lay out everything within your organization system, your daily list, your weekly list, all of that. And then it'll prepare you for the week. You'll be way more organized for it. All right, we can go to the next slide of questions. I could see it. Do you want to open up for questions?
Okay, the lines are all unmuted. Apologies earlier, we had a slight technical issue with the unmuting, but the lines should all be open. If you're not speaking, if you could just individually mute yourself so there's no background noise. If you're on the phone, that would be great. But lines are open for questions, and you can also type your questions into the chat. Brian will read them out.
Right. Sure. Yeah. You know. In all senses.
All right, looks like we had one question typed in. It says, when you say is something portable, would you recommend a digital planner? All right, sorry, Katrina, I just unmuted you again, so you can respond to the question.
Yeah, so what I would say is it really depends upon your type. The digital planners work very well, especially if you can get something that works on your phone, because I think all of us always have our phone at all times. So there are a couple of apps that actually are pretty good planners. I can find the ones. I haven't looked at them in a little bit of time, but there are apps that you can actually hook up to systems online. So if you have something that is on your phone, that works very well. But if you have another form of digital planner, or maybe even have an iPad, the smaller ones, those work well. Those work. And then, you know, I know there are a lot of people who don't really utilize the digital aspect. So even if you have like a small notebook, that can work as well.
Great, thanks, Katrina. There's no other questions coming through right now, so we can keep moving along.
Okay, great. You go to the next one. All right, so client management. This is my favorite thing. So to give you a little bit of context, I manage 5 clients now. all nonprofit clients. And what I would say is that my client management has dramatically increased over the last couple of years. So what I would say is the more and more clients you have, the harder it gets. It never gets any easier. So you know, if you ever thought maybe you're gonna catch on to it, what I say is it just gets a little bit harder, especially the more clients you add to your bucket. But here are just a couple of general tips, just managing clients of all types. So the first is, I would say, really working to manage their expectations regularly. You know, clients from all sorts, whether they be low-income individuals or maybe even CEO levels, if you guys ever do go to the private sector, everyone comes in to the work with you with expectations. So opening up communications from the beginning is extremely important. And then also being realistic with them. So you don't want to be pessimistic to where they're depressed and they never think that anything is going to get done, but you know, be as factual as you can. So usually what I tell my clients is, you know, I'll give them a percentage chance. So I'll usually say, you know, we have 70% chance that we'll win this case. If we do win the case, what will happen is X, Y, Z. If we don't win the case, we have other options for what we can do to keep trying to win, to go around and win. So really laying this out with your clients and doing it regularly. And when I say regularly, I usually communicate with them on a weekly to bi-weekly basis. And doing it regularly is really good for managing their expectations. And it's also good for really preventing, I don't know if you've ever had any very anxious clients, but preventing them from kind of pushing that anxiety onto you. So a lot of anxiety that clients face, is just any human interaction, is really based around the unknown and fear. So the more you communicate with them and the more they feel like they're in this process with you, the more you'll actually help to kind of at least limit their fear. You're never going to extinguish their fear, but at least limit it down a little much. So really just communicating them and then being open and talking about, you know, what the next steps are. Don't make it totally black and white. There's always options, especially in law, but really keeping it open for them. Another is really communicating in the manner that works best for them. So what I would say is this is all communication types: email, phone, text, in person. And what I would say is everyone has a different communication type, and it's your job as being in kind of the service client-facing industry to really figure out how your client best communicates, how they like to communicate. So, you know, one of my favorite things is I have a lot of clients and they're older, much older, like talking baby boomer up, and they hate email and they hate text. I find that often kind of the millennial generation and then even Generation X, we really like email and text. It's easy, it's fast, we're able to be as clear as possible because we're writing it. But it's not necessarily the preference for the older generations. So really figuring out what they like, and I've always find with the baby boomer generations, they like phone a lot. And then they really, really, really like in-person a lot, which can be a little bit of a hassle at times. But it is best to communicate with them in the manner they like. And what I would say is kind of on the other side, if you're communicating with them in a manner that they are not comfortable with, there's oftentimes that they're not going to be fully listening to what you're trying to tell them. They're not going to be necessarily absorbing the information like how you think they're absorbing the information. So a great example is I have this client. He's about 65 years old. He doesn't like email and he doesn't like a lot of text. So if I send him an email, he'll probably read the first 2 sentences of it and then everything else is lost. However, when I talk to him on the phone, and I can literally be reading the email that I would have sent him, he absorbs about 95% of it. And it really is just a style preference. And you can even think about it going back to how people learn. Some people learn better visually, some people learn better kinesthetically, some people learn better audio. It really is just all a preference, and it's your job to make sure you're meeting their preference and not them meeting your preference. If there's poor news, so if something goes wrong, really think about how to talk to them and discuss with them before and what their reaction may be. So giving some thought. So giving some thought to how you're actually going to present it to them, whether it be in person, over the phone, and then think about how they may react so that you're prepared to best advise them from there. So taking a little bit of time to do that is usually really helpful. What I would say is, we had a couple of poor news on our end, especially being in the health industry. And so instead of actually just sending an email, we asked everyone to come in person where we talked about them, allowed them a chance to talk about what their fears were, and handle their reactions. So really just being really creative and thoughtful about how you're handling that. Another thing is highlighting small wins. So, you're doing a lot of cases, and not only, for example, winning the case or getting someone a visa or something along those lines is the only win there is. In your work, there are a ton of wins out there. So highlighting those small little incremental wins are really good for keeping your client in the loop. So I think what I've heard a lot of times with clients, both in practice and then out of practice, is that when they haven't heard anything from their attorney in a long time, they often get this feeling that nothing's happening, and if nothing's happening, that they're not going to be successful in what they're working on. But you, behind the scenes, you're doing all kinds of work, you're getting little wins, you're like, great, we're on the right track. But just really communicating with them those small wins. And that's also going to help with the ones who have anxiety, which is a lot of them. That's going to help with really making them feel more and more comfortable with the process. Another is really being considerate of their time. So all of your clients have lives. They have jobs, they have personal and social things that they're doing. So when they're coming into your office, or you're setting up a time to call them or something else, maybe you're emailing them, whatever, just really being considerate of everything that they have going on in their lives. So for example, if you have a meeting with them, making sure you're on time too. Not only do you want them to be on time, but make sure you're on time as well. Try not to go over the time slot that you made for them, not only for your time management sakes, but for their time management sakes. But just be very considerate of their time. And then finally, as I mentioned, just really keep them in the loop. Regular communications. Even if nothing is happening, usually I recommend having weekly calls with all of your clients. Phone is okay. Again, you'll want to use the best communication method for your client, whatever that may be, but really just keeping them in the loop. And client management is hard, especially if you don't have a win to report to them. Even if nothing's happening or has happened, just keeping them in the loop. And that usually makes them feel more comfortable. All right, I will pause now for questions.
Okay, Katrina, I've got unmuted people who are listening in on their phones.
Okay.
Those of you on your computers, it would be, I think, easiest if you could just type in your questions.
we'll just give folks 30 seconds if you want to, if you're on your computer, if you want to type in questions, or if you're on the phone, you're welcome to go ahead and ask them. Your lines are unmuted.
Hi, Katrina. One question was just typed in. So the question is, a concern that a person has is would it be possible to give too much information? And so I think specifically they're asking how much information should you share with a client?
Oh, so it really is a judgment call. What I would say is if you know things are likely to quickly change and you have a client who maybe is a more anxious individual, I probably would limit how much you're sharing. Obviously, still keeping them in the loop broadly is good, but I would limit it. So, you know, as an example, I have one client, and she's wonderful. She's very delightful, but she is very, very anxious. And in my work, things are always changing. So, you know, I do keep her in the loop. I do keep her on a plan and walk through where we are in this plan. But when there are little details, like little things that I'm working defending on, I won't fully share all of those unless there's nothing else that can happen later, if that makes sense. So really just your judgment call on the client, and really the situation. Is it going to change? Is it something that's like, this is something that could happen really quickly or could change really quickly? It's just kind of comparing those two things of their personality type and kind of where you are in the process.
All right, thank you so much. Though there are no more questions at this time.
Great. So we can go to the next slide, slide number 9. Great. Okay, upward management. So this is by far my favorite thing that I learned when I was a new attorney. So upward management is really, the best way to describe it is the management of your boss. And you're probably laughing a little bit, and you know, hopefully you're not too loud on your computer for your bosses to hear. But you know, I think one thing to keep in mind is that your bosses are human. They're super busy. They have all different management types, whether it be micromanagement or macromanagement. I find oftentimes in a lot of nonprofits, the kind of macromanagement seems to be more common because everyone just has so much on their plate. But really, it is a very important role for you to actually be upward managing to your boss, especially as you're getting more and more senior in your position, because you have a lot of stuff that you need to know from them, and you need guidance, but you can't naturally expect them to know everything that you want. So the first thing that I recommend is really having weekly meetings with your boss. If you don't already do this, you should really work to do this. Even if it's only a half-an-hour meeting, work with them to get it in their schedule. So my superior is extremely busy. We usually have our weekly meetings very, very early on Monday mornings. So it does require, you know, us to come in and be prepared, but I know that his schedule changes so quickly that without doing them at that time, they're going to be canceled or double booked. So really finding at least 30 minutes once a week to talk with your boss. Another thing is you want to actually create an agenda. They should not be creating the agenda. You should be creating the agenda. And really when you're creating the agenda, think of it as really thinking of them as a thought partner in your work. What are items that you need to discuss? and really having that really be the highlight of what your agenda is. It's not really focused on, oh, here's an update on this, here's an update on this. It's really, where are those sticky spots in your work that you need feedback on, that you're not 100% comfortable or you haven't fully done yet, that you need their expertise on. That should be really the focal point of your weekly meeting, is you know, what are those issues? Really using them as a thought partner, using them as kind of a sounding board, and using that time for that. And then thinking ahead, discussing potential tricky issues you may come up with in the future that you may perceive happening, and really saying, you know, from your experience, how would you recommend handling this? Also, the next thing on top of your weekly meetings and agendas is also to talk to your manager about their priorities for you. So oftentimes a million things get thrown at us, added to our plate. You know, another project, more research, more X, more Y, more Z. There is nothing wrong with asking your manager, between this project, and this project, which one is the biggest priority? And that takes a second. That you can literally be walking by them in the hall and ask them that question. But you know, I think as being a manager myself for the last about 12 years, what I can say is that we delegate down, and we forget a lot of things that we delegate, which is horrible. So just reminding us and saying, okay, what takes priority? And then, you know, whenever my employees come to me and ask me what takes priority, I'm able to say, this is my #1 priority for you. That should be what you're working on first. And then this is second, and this is third. It takes literally 30 seconds max. So you should be regularly talking about what the priorities are if you're getting more and more things added to your plate and you're just kind of feeling overwhelmed. Your manager is there to help you to actually prioritize. Also, make their job easier. So again, your manager is busy. They are there to be kind of your thought partner, your guidance, your mentor, but you want to make it as easy as possible. So we have this rule, and this was actually a rule at Equal Justice Works, and we call it don't pass the monkey. And so what that means is that whenever you come up with a problem, say I don't know, some fire comes up, instead of thinking about how potentially you would recommend to solve the problem, you immediately go to your manager and ask them how they would solve it. That's called passing the monkey, where you're literally, the monkey is literally on your back and you're putting it on your manager's back. You don't want to pass the monkey. And what I would say is this is a great tool for you to advance up in your career, is to really start thinking about whenever you're coming up with these issues or potential tricky issues, to think about how you would recommend to handle the situation before you ask, and then offer that recommendation to your manager when you're presenting the issue. They will appreciate that you're offering a recommendation, and even if it's wrong, at least your mind is going in that way, and you're taking a lot of that passing the monkey work off of your manager. So it makes their life easier, on top of actually developing you for a higher level position. Because right at some point, you probably want to have the job that your manager does. So really think about having those recommendations ready for them before you meet with them. Finally, just like your client, you want a communication system that works for your boss, not a communication system that works for you. So I see this at all times. So I have employees in the past, and their communication system was always email. Well, I get about 400 emails a day. So if they're trying to ask me something urgent, and I'm buried in email all day and I have meetings, I won't see that urgent email until the next day. And so then it falls through the cracks, or it's late. My communication system is actually best if someone comes to me in person and talks to me. So the same thing with your boss. Figure out what their communication system is. I often develop with my employees is that when something for me is an emergency, if there's an emergency they should be talking to me about, if I'm not in the office, they should just text me. That's the #1 way to do it. If I'm in the office, they just come and see me. If it's something that they want input on, but it can wait a couple of days, then an email is perfect. So really working with your boss, and you probably know by now what their communication preferences is, but really figure that out. Because if you're sending them emails when they're buried in emails and it's something urgent, it's going to drop the ball. You're not going to get what you need, and then bottleneck will start happening. Also, whether it be your weekly meetings or after specific projects, you want to ask for feedback. So your bosses, will give you feedback if you ask for feedback. If you have a project, say you have a project that you did and you just completed it, you should always ask for them feedback. What did I do right on it? What did I do wrong on it? What can I improve? What would help me in really growing and improving for the future projects? So I think that's really just something that you should really consider is constantly asking your boss for feedback. I think I would say that we often expect our bosses to automatically give us feedback, but it goes back to the same thing as they're just so busy. A lot of bosses are just so busy that they forget. And then, especially if you're in the millennial generation, feedback is extremely important. So you should take that initiative to ask for it. Get what you need from that relationship. And then finally, this is probably logical, but be emotionally intelligent. When your boss gives you feedback, for example, if it's constructive criticism, don't take it personally, because then they're not going to want to give you feedback again. Remember that your boss is still human. They're extremely busy, just like you're extremely busy. And then really don't stew in silence. If there's something that pissed you off, or something that made you angry about your boss, think about how to handle it. You don't have to do it right then. Make sure your emotions are calm. So wait a day or so. But do talk to your boss about it. There's a ton of things, just like any busy people, that happen that we just, people don't even realize that they're doing, and that can make your work life negative. Actually having that open communication with your boss about, when this happened, I felt X, or when this happened, I thought this. But having that open communication with them in a non-conflicting manner, so you don't want to start an argument, you want to actually just have a discussion, will really help you to develop that relationship with your boss and get what you need to really be successful in your role. Okay, so I will pause there for any questions about upward management.
So we're unmuting the phone lines, and folks can type in any questions. We'll pause for like 30 seconds. No questions coming through at this point. We can pause again at the end, but Katrina, go for it.
Okay, great. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so this is giving you kind of just an overview, quick example of what I would recommend you including on your weekly agenda list. In case you're wondering what you may or may not want to have on it. So the first would have a bullet point on really just listing out what your weekly priorities and client goals are. This should not be text heavy, just quick summaries. The second thing is really the big issues that you want to discuss, and that should really be the big part of your entire meeting, whether it's a 30-minute meeting or an hour-long meeting. That should really be what you're focused on. So, for example, say you found new evidence and you're worried that the evidence was contaminated by some chance. The next is just to list your meetings or any operational items that you have going on that you just want to keep them updated on. For example, oh, hey, reminder, I'm out of the office on Friday. This court date is set for Tuesday, etc. Just kind of quick updates so that they can read them. But even if you don't talk in that much depth with them, they're just at least alerted. Another thing, especially as you're learning, which is helpful, is to do a bullet point on things you've learned for the week. So that may sound a little odd, and it may even sound like a little weird being in your position, but sharing some of the things that you learned in the week, and oftentimes when you share things that you learned, maybe your boss will add more important information for you to help you continually learning, or the things that you learn may actually be helpful for them in their future work. So for example, things you learn, maybe you presented in front of a judge and you actually learn that he doesn't actually like humor in the courtroom. So pointing that out to your boss, especially if your boss has never presented in front of that specific judge, will be helpful for them in the future. Or maybe your boss has actually had a number of cases in front of that judge, and then he or she will give you a bunch of feedback, other things to know about working with that judge. But just thinking about one or two things to just point out that the things you learned, and it will help really with that learning process. And then finally, I usually do recommend adding the feedback. If you have anything you want feedback on, really just add it in there to make sure that you're hitting on it in the meeting. What went well? What could you improve? Things on any projects that you have done. Really just actually have a specific time for feedback. Okay, next slide. I think we could probably go to the next one, Katsia. Okay. All right, so the next thing is horizontal management. This is actually management of your coworkers, which you don't really think about managing them, right? You never would say, oh, I'm their manager. But working with your coworkers actually does take a little bit of maneuvering, especially if you're working with them on the same projects. So here are just a couple of tips for working with your coworkers. So the first is to set deadlines, and don't be afraid of taking charge and creating rules and timelines. Obviously, don't be bossy or forceful about it, but do make sure that your coworker, when you're working on a project, kind of knows what your expectations are, and you can set out the full deadline. For example, using the Gantt chart that we discussed earlier, and just making sure that they're on the same page. They know that you need X on this specific date so that you could do Y by this specific date. Just really having those open communications for setting deadlines. Have open communications in general. So if there's any issue that you're having with your coworker, you should definitely discuss it. Again, the same thing with your manager. Don't just like stew in silence. Don't be passive aggressive. Have an adult conversation with them about, about actually what has happened, what you're concerned about, and how you can work together to make it happen. So it can be something like saying, I'm concerned that we may not be making the deadline because this happened, this happened, this happened. Would you be able to give me the research by tomorrow so that I can do the analysis on Friday? If they say no, then you can continue the conversation, say, okay, when do you think you can make it work, etc. But having that open communication with them will be really, really helpful. And I think in the workplace, especially with our coworkers, we often assume that they kind of know our own timelines, but everyone's very different. If you've ever taken that Myers-Briggs test, you know for a fact that everyone has different styles and personality types and timelines. So just making sure that they understand what you have going on and what your expectations are for working together should help to improve that relationship. And then the same thing, like our clients and our bosses, communicate in the mode that works best for them. Don't be afraid to call them by phone if you need to. And I think a lot of people much rather prefer email than they do picking up the phone, but feel free to just give them a call and ask them if you need it. And make sure that you're being clear. I think this happens a lot is we make a lot of assumptions in our communication. So be as clear as possible about your needs for your coworker. Okay, yeah, next slide. All right, so the next thing is personnel management. So this is if you have someone who maybe works under you, whether it's an intern, a volunteer, maybe you actually have a staff assistant or an employee who works underneath you. These are really some basic tips. There are many, many classes you can take on actually managing personnel, but these are basic tips for helping you to manage them. So the first thing is you should have weekly meetings. Even if it's a volunteer that you're managing or an intern who maybe is only going to be around for 2 or 3 months, you should really try to have weekly meetings with them. These meetings should be set for them to develop. So this shouldn't be something that you're taking onto your plate. This is them taking it onto their plate. So they should be developing the weekly meeting agendas for you, using the same structure you would for your manager. Things to discuss, priorities, reminders of your meetings, things they've learned, and feedback. Your role as a manager is to delegate and to guide your personnel. Your role is not to do their job. That's why they're there, is so that they can help you. And I think especially with being so good at things you guys have learned in the past, there's a natural tendency to just, oh my gosh, I'll just do this, I'll be quicker. But that's not going to be a way to guide them in the future, and you're actually going to be spending more of your time in the long run than you would be if they did it in the long run. So think about it, 1 hour of your time versus 1 hour of your staff's time. You know, it is comparable. Your time should be spent to that more substantive issues, while your staff's time, your intern or volunteer's time should be spent on those other things that are kind of just more time consuming, that they can handle while your brain is used for something else. And if you ever do go into any of the private law practice areas where you charge clients by the hour, this is a huge issue that comes about, is when middle management is doing things that associate level should be doing, because they're charging at a higher rate than your associates are. So middle management needs to get really, really good at delegating down, otherwise you're spending your client's tab a lot faster. So just if you ever go into private practice, that's a huge issue that comes about. Another thing is again, you're delegating and you're guiding. So you don't want to macromanage. And you know, I see this a lot when people have interns, is that they just throw stuff at the interns and just expect them to do it. You don't want to be MIA for months, you don't want to be MIA for weeks. So when you're giving someone a new project, whether it's a volunteer or an intern, you'll want to start off by giving them detailed instructions about the project in the beginning, which when you're really busy, this is a nuisance. It's really hard. But you're going to want to give them kind of the 5 W's of journalism, so to speak. The who, the what, the where, the when, the why. You're going to give them the 5 W's about the project, everything they need to know. And then you're also going to want to give them any resources to help them do it. So say you want them to write a legal research memo. You'll send them an example of something that you thought was good in the past. That would be something good for them to use to do that. Another thing is the Starbucks repeat back. So when you go to Starbucks, you probably notice and you say, I want a grande caramel macchiato. And the person in the Starbucks register actually always repeats back your order. Okay, we want 1 grande caramel macchiato with non-fat milk. That's called a repeat back. The reason is not just for fun. The Starbucks employees aren't just doing it because they love repeating back your order and they love Starbucks, but they actually do it to help with the memory of writing it down and actually doing it. So what I would suggest is that when you're giving someone who's working for you a new project, have them actually repeat back what they heard. repeating back what they heard will help you to see if you missed anything, if they misinterpreted anything, if there is any other additional information you may be able to provide them to help you. The repeat back is very, very helpful in doing. Next is when you give them a project, again, you don't want to be MIA for a long period of time, but you also don't want to be a micromanager where you're practically just doing the work. You want to take pieces of the pie. So for example, say you have a project that should take them about 2 weeks to do, have them send you something like in the middle, or not in the middle, usually something that would take about the first 25% of that time, so you can take a look at it and give them feedback to make sure that they are on the same page as you, that they're on the right track. The last thing that you want them to do is for them to do the entire project and they did it completely wrong, because it's wasting their time and then you're mad at them because you didn't get what you wanted. So just taking that piece of the pie is really important to make sure that you both are on the same page with what you want. And then as well, on the opposite end of things, don't be a micromanager. And I know everyone hates having micromanagers to begin with, so don't be one. And this usually happens because we don't like to delegate that much, especially if you really want things done a certain way. Usually it's easier to be a micromanager where you have everything under your control. But again, you only have so much time in the day, so you do need to delegate. So really giving them ownership of things. Say, you know, you're responsible for all of this legal research. You're responsible for making sure the logistics of this clinic goes well. Really giving them ownership of things and just fully taking it off your plate. Evaluate them regularly and provide them feedback. So they should always be working with you to get as much feedback as they can from you, but do make sure you're giving them regular evaluations. So usually we do evaluations quarterly. So if you do evaluations, set goals at the beginning and then evaluate them once a quarter. The same thing as your boss, don't let them pass the monkey to you. So a lot of times, especially when you have more junior people, they'll just come to you for fires at all times. Oh my gosh, this happened. Oh my gosh, this happened. Oh my gosh, this happened. As your manager, you kind of sometimes feel like their parent. Like you're like, okay, let me solve this problem for you. And so you solve it and then they go away. But then after solving it, you realize this interrupted about half an hour of your time. So what you want to do instead of solving every problem for them is you want to start training them to think about how to solve the problems. So instead of saying, okay, what you need to do is this, you say, well, what do you think you should do for this? And it's going to be painful at first, is what I'll tell you. It will be very, very painful at first. But once they start getting the idea that they need to come to you with recommendations on how to solve the problem, then they're going to start thinking through it before, and they're going to actually present you with solutions in the future. And it'll save you time. So we're really working with them to not pass the monkey and getting them to bring solutions to the problems before just relying on you to solve it. Try your best to give them feedback in real time. What I can say is that I've had managers who gave me feedback about things and it was a year ago. That's a little frustrating for an employee, and you probably have felt the same way. Try to give them feedback within the next couple of days that something happens, especially if something went wrong. Say, you know, I saw you did this, you know, in the future I'd like you to do this because of this. You know, the last thing you want is to know you've been doing something wrong for a very long period of time. Set your communication standards. So just as with your coworkers and your boss and your clients, you were working to do their communication standards and make sure that you're communicating with them the way you want or the way they want. For your personnel, you actually want to have them communicating with you the way you like it. So again, as I mentioned, for me, any fires or anything that's urgent that comes up, I want to be texted or I want to be told in person. So really setting that standard with your personnel is that if something emergency comes up, you just text me or you call me. I don't want to get an email about it. And then the final thing is setting boundaries. Just like not having the monkey pass to you, usually I'll keep my door closed, or if you're in a cube, maybe even putting a sign up, really making sure that your employees or your volunteers or interns are not coming in and out of your office all the day. I do say, like, the open door policy is great, but it gets really, really hard to do your work, especially if you have work blocks. So really setting boundaries with your employees to make sure that if you are doing a work block, that you're not having people come in and out and interrupt you, where you're not actually getting those big milestones done in the day. Set those boundaries. All right, I will open it up to questions.
So there's no written questions right now, but we can keep it open for about 30 more seconds, I think. I'll unmute everybody on the phone again so that they can say their questions out loud if you don't have access to a computer.
All right, I think I get the next one, Brian.
Okay, you said you want to move on, Katrina?
Yeah. Yes,
All right.
please.
All right.
All right, so here's the last slide, and then we'll open it up for final questions. So, I guess I think I mentioned to you in the beginning. So my first role out of law school was working at the International Organization for Migration as an immigration attorney. And what I would say is I got burnt out. I'm going to be completely honest. I got burnt out. I took my cases home with me regularly, both emotionally and actually doing work. I was burnt out after a year. I was just very exhausted. I lost that exciting flame that I used to have in law school. And really what happened is that I didn't set boundaries for myself. I didn't take care of myself. And I think a lot of times in public interest law, that's exactly what happens. We are so focused on saving the world, which is good, which is very, very good. We should never lose that. We're so focused on saving the world that we don't actually take care of ourselves. And so just want to take this time to really talk about self-care and the importance of self-care. Because if you want to be in this field or even going to another field after this, you need to take care of yourself to do well for your clients. So the first thing that's important are really creating boundaries. And these are boundaries both with your personal life and your work life. Creating boundaries. I think technology nowadays has made it hard for us. We always have our cell phones, we always have social media, we always have our email on. Setting boundaries to when you're actually connected is important. So, what I would say is really working with boundaries, setting your hours, and then mentally turning off outside of the hours. So you know exactly when things are kind of high season or high day periods of your work. For me, it's 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. are kind of the main chunk hours of my work, Monday through Friday. So what I do is usually I will start by turning on my email around 7:30 a.m. and I actually turn it off on my phone. So turning on my email at 7:30 a.m. and then I'll answer emails till about 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. I will literally turn off my email for my work after those hours and then turn it back on when I start my day. For the weekend, I keep it off all weekend. And this has really, really helped to disconnect, to really become mentally recharged. And do you know what's really funny, what I learned when I did this? No one died. I think we always have this fear that, oh my gosh, if I'm not checking my email at all times, or if I'm not checking the news at all times, I'm going to miss something, and then there's going to be a huge disaster, and you know, everything's going to fall apart. It turns out that when you actually set boundaries within reason, right? Don't set your boundaries where you're starting your day at noon and ending at 3 p.m., but within reason, setting your boundaries, and then recharge. Actually use your time out of office to recharge. Socially, be with your family, be with your friends. Do things that actually de-stress you. Exercise, eat right, meditate. If you haven't learned how to meditate, I do suggest meditating. And then actually setting up social or decompression time, whether you're an extrovert and you need to be out with people, or you're an introvert and you need to recharge all weekend, make sure you're doing those. Because what I'll tell you from direct experience is that if you don't set these boundaries, you're going to get burnt out. And it may not be now, but it will be sometime in the future. And as soon as you're burnt out, it's so hard to come back and be recharged. You'll literally have to take weeks off, which you're probably like shocked. You're like, yeah, I have no time to take weeks off. You literally have to take weeks off to be finally recharged, to get yourself to the right mental state. So just kind of my encouragement, take care of yourself and set boundaries, not only boundaries that you follow by, but also boundaries that you communicate with your team members and with your supervisors. A lot of times you don't even have to communicate with them, with your supervisors. Usually they'll just start to know that you don't answer emails till 7:30 a.m. instead of maybe if they send emails at 2 a.m., you're not responding until, you know, 7:30, 8 a.m. It's really just setting boundaries and taking care of yourself. And that's it. Those are all my recommendations, and I'll open it now for any final questions that you guys may have.
Well, thank you so much, Katrina. I'm reading all the lines now. So again, if you're listening on the phone or have your audio on, if you could unmute yourself to avoid background noise, that would be great. We'll
out of that parking lot.
Any questions that folks may have just to wrap up. And thank you so much again.
Go look at Dwight's office and see.
Curious notes over here. Everything you've laid out has been really, really helpful.
Oh, and a guy and a dog.
Hopefully everybody's muted. We'll give everyone a minute to either type their questions in the chat box, and Brian will read them out or say them out on the phone.
Okay, we have 2 questions already. The first says, do you have any recommendations for working with unpaid volunteers? They find it's hard to demand regular scheduling or time commitments from people who are there out of the willingness of their heart, but aren't as helpful if they cannot commit.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. All right, great. Sorry. Yeah, so what I would say is I think it's just a communication question from the beginning with your volunteer. So I think having a conversation with them, a very candid conversation with them from the beginning about what they are willing to do, what time they're able to commit, and then communicating that you would want to have regular meetings with them. Especially volunteers, as you said, are unpaid. You know, they have flexible schedules. Not expecting to have weekly meetings is probably best, but maybe trying to have bi-weekly meetings. Even if they're short phone meetings, those work too. But really, you know, starting to have those communications with them, you know, being flexible with what we discuss, like they're not going to be giving you a weekly agenda, for example, but just having a weekly or bi-weekly check-in or even monthly check-in if you need to keep them on track will be helpful.
Excellent, thank you. So there have been a couple questions about a recording or the PowerPoint slides for this, and I think we can say yes, this is being recorded, and we'll share that recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation. And then we had another question for you, Katrina, asking if you could please share any apps or online tools you use for project management, and also if you have any recommendations for a physical planner.
So I will share, Brian, I'll share with you a list of the apps and the online tools that I use. And then there are some other resources that I'll share too that I can share with everyone. For physical planner, unfortunately, I do not have any suggestions. I am not a physical planner type of gal, but I'm positive there are some out there. But physical planners, I unfortunately don't have any recommendations, but I'll share all those online ones with you, Brian. You can share with everyone.
Great, thank you. We'll just send that out the same email as the slides and recording then, so
Okay.
you can be expecting that. And then the last question that we have for now, and I have kept the question box open, as well as anyone on the phone can ask questions out loud. But this is in regard to setting boundaries. They ask, when it comes to cell phones and text messages, would you apply the same time schedule as what you did for email?
So yes, and well, what I would say is that setting the boundaries with the people that you work with, that if they're calling outside of those hours or texting outside those hours, that it is a true emergency. So I will answer them if it is an emergency, and sometimes they do come up right after those hours. So I know that if I am getting a text or a call, it is something that's a fire. That is an actual fire. But otherwise, I make it very clear that if it's not a fire, then it can wait till tomorrow.
Great, thanks, Katrina. This is Katya. I have two questions for you, actually. That we're just waiting for some more questions to come in the chat box. So they're sort of different. So I'll start one and then the other after you've responded to the first one. But my first question is, you talked a lot about work blocking, which I do as well, and I think is really, really helpful. So what are some strategies you've employed to make sure that folks honor your work block, both people that you supervise and people, your boss? Do you find it difficult to enforce it, or have you sort of set those what are some tips about setting that boundary?
So a couple of things I do, and again, I know for a lot of you, you won't have this. So I do have a door to my office, so I keep my door closed when I'm doing my work blocks, and then I open it when I'm not. Obviously, I know a lot of you may have an open office environment. And what I used to do, actually, when I was at Equal Justice Works, is I actually created a sign for myself, which sounds absurd, but I actually did create a sign for myself, and like it was kind of like a nicer "Do Not Disturb" sign that I had right in front of my cubicle. So people usually saw it, and they usually automatically wouldn't say anything. Another thing too is just obviously when they're not getting the gist. For example, if your door is closed but then they try to come in, or the sign's up but they don't actually look at it, I actually do communicate. I say, hey, listen, I'm actually really busy right now. Can I come back to you within the next hour to talk about this? And usually they are respectful and they say yes, or maybe if it's your boss, they say, oh my gosh, this is an emergency though. Then take it. But really working with them to communicate that this is busy. Your work block is like you are in a meeting, but with yourself. And they wouldn't interrupt you if you were in a meeting with someone else. So really kind of using the same method of, this is really busy. I can't talk right now unless it's a complete emergency. And usually after a while, they'll start to work with those boundaries. But it will take some development, is what I will say. It's not going to be automatic.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing that I do also sometimes, if I anticipate pre-schedule a work block, is I'll just send an email before it starts and let people know.
That's fair.
Yeah, so I'll say, hi, I'm going underground. If it's an absolute emergency, come over or call me. Otherwise, I'll turn back to my emails and be more communicative when I'm out of my work block. So that's another idea. And so my second question is sort of like switching gears a little bit, is about, you talked a little about sort of lateral or managing sideways to coworkers. And I think some of our fellows and our law students also work with external partners as parts of coalitions to accomplish things collectively. And I'm just sort of curious, I would assume that the same sorts of principles apply of sideways management, but if there are any other particular things you might consider considering that, you know, the way that you relate to someone inside your office who you're working with sort of laterally might be different than the way you relate to someone outside of your office.
Yeah, so I say the same principles apply of the communication type and setting deadlines. The manner is a bit different. So a great example is I actually manage a coalition of 150 different stakeholder groups, which, you know, all of your work probably does include managing different stakeholders, and it's a lot, especially if you're trying to get a majority of people to agree upon something. It's really hard. So usually, a lot of the stakeholder groups that I work with, usually their communication style is more an email. So in the actual title of the email, I usually say, need input by X date, or need input by Wednesday. And then I'll include in my email just the basics of the information, what I need input for, and say, hey, like, I really need your input. I understand if you're very, very busy and you can't do it. We do need to proceed on. So if I don't receive it by this time, your input will not be included. So I know a lot of you can't necessarily put that hard line on there, but if you can put the hard line on and just being very evident with your communications, that you need them to respond by X date, usually people will respond by that time period. And then another, for a couple of partners who are really higher level, like executive director levels, I actually will include their assistants on it, and their assistants usually will get the response back that I need in time. So instead of just including the ED, I'll include the ED and their assistant, or maybe their staff member who works closely with them, and they'll usually make sure that I get the response back or whatever needs to happen in that time period.
Excellent, thanks, Katrina. We did get one more question that came in, so I wanted to ask you that now. It says, with the work block schedule, if your job has an online calendar such as Outlook, could you set yourself as busy or in a meeting to help with scheduling that time apart?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do use Outlook, and that's exactly what I do. So I literally have a invitation for myself that has that hour and a half work block period marked on my schedule. So when anyone from my office looks at my schedule, it looks like I'm at a meeting. So that's a good, you know, that's a good option to use, especially if you have Outlook or if your organization uses Google. They all offer this like calendar option to actually set up a meeting with yourself on your calendar when it's shared.
That's great. Thanks. I didn't even know that either. So everyone's learning new things today. Like just another minute before we wrap up to see if there are any last questions, both on the phone and in the chat box. Okay, nothing appears to be coming through, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up since we're getting really close to 3:30 Eastern Time. Just want to thank you again, Katrina. This was so incredibly helpful and nuts and bolts, and you gave some really excellent tips. As Brian mentioned, we'll be circulating to everyone who's participated, plus the wider network of AmeriCorps JD students and AmeriCorps fellows, the recording link, the slides, and the list of resources on digital management apps that Katrina has generously offered to send us as well. So I just want to thank everyone again for participating this afternoon, and I hope you all have a great day. And thanks again, Katrina.
No problem. Thanks, guys.